So just to give a general reference and overview of collectively where I'm coming from is that even in my dreams, when I'm talking to people in my dreams about going beyond the philosophy and getting into the nitty gritty, as Cliff High says, the gritology, because everything has a layer of gritology. You know, when you look down into cells and cell division and how um, what energizes, again, gives agency to and sort of gives a reason is these the energetics of this power, what empowers. And that is, to me, everything leads back to a form of technology that we are masterfully put together. But what else do we have to compare it to? Really, that we live in a universal field, a constant of what the master key system refers to loosely as sort of when you get down into the underpinnings of this, that you have this sort of Luciferian mind that constructs the matrix through geometry and available sciences, energy producing, energy culminating sciences, and uses this uses the available resources, universal available resources, to further construct. So you get into the von Neumann probe field theory, the Dyson sphere, many worlds. You get into all of these, and they all have credence on a multi-layered complexity that really just leads us back to a technology. So um, perhaps it's in our degrading of not only just ourself or selves, but the mind in operation, the available stream of uh, the unfoldment of understanding, as to say that we can really define what technology is. That we are very much misusing that term, right? Along with the grand architect of the universe, along with architecture, um, that it's really just displaying a sort of Jungian shadow self, or a anima, animus, um, that we want to return. It's easier for us to return to the dark aspects of the self and recoil back into the submission of survival, that we had to do these dark and dastardly things just for a girl to survive, you know. So what is technology? um, it's when this torch is passed on, when there's enough cutting edge, base, rudimentary uh, forms of information through technology that can be passed on like a torch, but doesn't. So you get into language, LLMs, if you want to call them that. You get into what might be considered dead language, but you get into why there's such a subversion toward finding on a universal scale, finding a fundamental language that when we're talking about cells, when we're talking about microorganisms, when we're talking about how energies seem to move and culminate in a uniform measure, and how we identify the self. Does the self take place through this ganglionic mass, this vagus, pons, sort of basal, olfactory, amygdala, a memory mind matrix of a switch, the main motherboard, the main switch, deeper than that, but that allows sort of like this Transformers event to take place, where now you have access to the CNS, the PNS, and the sympathetic nervous system, and even more so, now you have gained um, a mechanism of occult power and control, meaning that every piece of arcana really alludes to a sort of proving to the network, right, that you understand the larger picture. That now that you're able to effectively combine the internal self, right, with the mechanism that this is me, I am this ganglionic mass, I am the breath, right? If you want to get into more yogic type of literature, and then or a Bodhi mind, and then you see that this entity can now enter into something that it couldn't even posit or believe before, where remote viewing and what they call right now out of body projections could even begin to take place. That you have this aura, you have this tether, you have this sort of central self, and then when you really back up and you get beyond the metaphysics and the phenomenology, you're going, wait a minute, isn't that how this cell phone works? Isn't this how the whole Metcalfe's law, cybernetic disbursement, mathematical disbursement takes place? Isn't this just technology that we're talking about over and over again? That you are talking about yourself in the terms where, when you get into away from the woo-woo, you are talking about yourself as a node, right? And now you are seen as an authentic node, a complete node. You've done all the diagnostics on yourself. You've gone through. You've created these treaties and mechanisms within the self where there is an alliance. You could say that that's IT, that's integration, right? And now the systems are uniformly functioning, and now you're able to send out these projections, which would be nothing more than communications, right? You could say, are you going to stand back and say that it's fantastical or an everyday phenomenon that pheromones do such a thing, right? So you get into these codified networking systems that could say that we are rediscovering all of these technologies through ourselves, because all those components define us and lead up to the recreation of us. And that what we are really doing is we're going through an anthropological discovery of what the human being is as a form of technology, a high form of technology, where you have living tissues, right? And this gets back into these von Neumann probes, or a certain theoretical science behind the reproducible replication of an agent that can be that memory, right? Having agency can be transferred to other bodies, and there's a reproduction or a regeneration when you get into the Masonic inferences of this, right? Where you have now the entitlement and the powership of going to the direct source, which in our universal model, localized universal model, obviously we're always reaching beyond, but it is the sun, right? And you get into sun worship, but then to put the term worship back into, like, you could say worship, WAR. You could say worship. You're now building another altar and going into this ideation of the occult and trailing off, that leads into the zodiacal, calendric, arcane, ancient mechanisms of woo-woo, frou-frou worship. But when you get back to the practicum, to the practicality of, I'm going to start counting strings, right? Like Einstein, he's always put down on this, and I'm not legitimizing. I'm not even saying that what his own namesake and his discoveries weren't directly influenced and projected, downloaded into him, nor Nikolai Tesla. But what I am saying is that everyone was searching for beyond just themselves and the mere survival, that they were giving up the easier route. Maybe not so much with Einstein, right? But definitely the heroics with Nikolai Tesla, right? Where they didn't realize that they were pandering down and actually suppressing information, condensing information, right? That's still, the jury's still out on Einstein, right? He's not a very popular person among these top physicists, right? To kind of look at it and going, wait a minute, we see the trail of where you were going here, and then we saw the subversion where you just sort of pulled back and said, here it is, right? But then there's illusions of this freaky science, right? And there always is, even in the naming of quarks, and a phenomenon that's taking place where um, there's there's a point of supercompensation, right? I guess is the point here, is that no matter what you're looking at, what physics, what mathematics you're looking at, what postulations and projections, it is that Copernicus mind, right? That Euclidean mind, as to say, I'm going to start counting this because that's all the control I have, and it's what's available to me. It's what I see, and I'm even going to start positing what the distance is, what the time factor is, and I'm working localized. I'm not legitimizing this beyond an engineered synthetic field, but what I'm saying is I'm going to start looking at it and understanding where in the hell I am if I'm ever going to possibly get out of this, you know? And so you get into the shamanic traditions, you know, that you could even say border on the Bodhi mind or Sikhism, where I just, I think I put an article link up that's in India, and I don't remember the name of these people, but if I just went and did a little quick look, I could get it, but I don't want to go off on a trail. What I'm saying is, you have of the highest priority. Somebody brought just so you can have reference and look it up yourself, because it's an area of interest, and I've seen articles and inferences in this on this field in this area as well. You'd think I'd remember by now, but I don't. I always got more into the informational aspect of it, like the 100 monkey right theory, where you have somebody who was killed by the local tribal system some many months ago, actually, that did this exact same thing, right? And that this tribe of, I think it's only like 150 people or something like that, in India, is the priority is containing the original, like whatever they do is okay. This is their island, and if you're intruding upon this island, you're an outsider. And so somebody was actually given time in prison for this, for visiting with a Diet Coke and trying to introduce and in the terms of the Indian government, it was contamination, right? They're trying to contaminate this contained field. And so where else do you see this sort of respect and preservation, right? If this happened in America, it would be considered like Montauk Island, where the CIA was 100% definitely in coercion of the American people, and people would be trying to break down the doors like they are now. But when there is an ancient history, and there is a religion, and there is a respect in the memory matrix that stretches back beyond the just 3.3 years of immediate time, to say I'm just looking out for my own ass, you know, from a westernized, um, you know, sort of paraphrasing, just to say the culmination of what we do is, you know, when we're considered like these Walmart walruses that are just sort of walking around and feeding off cheap foods, and that we're accepting this perishability, and then you get into the not only the preservation, but the protection and the guardianship of ancient traditions, right? In a sense, those who stayed, when you talk about Bali, right? When you talk about Hinduism, um, the encapsulate the people that have remained there and will not allow outside influences. You know, there's this idea of animism and totems that come directly from a very you could say, if you want to go back what would it be, maybe 1,000 years, right, 1,100 years, if you wanted it, when you're talking about the imperialist landing in that area, right, where you have this preservation of a certain sect of Hinduism that is invaluable to understanding culturally history. But then you see that around this time that there is postulation when you're talking about Tartaria, where you see that, wow, this is during this sort of Middle Ages beginning of this missing, maybe a couple hundred years into, a few hundred years into this missing 1,000 year time sequence, where they're trying to make it look like things were much further back than they actually were, as far as impacting events that that really dictate the torch or the mind that we're carrying on now, but really breed back to this shared agency of amnesia, where we are not capable of this transference of energy, and that is the main goal, is to disrupt and disturb, but give off strings of information that will create a new historical timeline, taking away from the actualization of what occurred during a certain subset of time, right? That we have advanced in the ways where we possibly full well knew, and this gets into the destruction of archives, archival histories, and that these archives have been saved, and that only certain people, only certain groups are privy to this information. And you got to start looking at the Smithsonian and the confiscation, and the subversion that took place with the giants and the giant races, and other things that I've talked about here. That if you want to go back and look at this, it's, when you get into the mud flood theories and everything else, when it's it's beyond theory. I mean, it's conclusive, but theoretical. How did that happen? What happened? What took place? And even getting into like the mini ice ages and things like this, that there, now that we've established that weather control is 100% taking place, and it's taking place on such a grand scale that if you want to look at Sean Ryan, episodes 64, 63 through 66, maybe 64 through 67, when you're looking at the disclosure, and what that points toward is human trafficking, this this sort of unseen oligarch, if you will, that is the true despotic, uh, autocratic sort of ruler, right? That through fantasy, and all we have is like this blending of fantasy and fiction, where we're left back to Christendom and this folklore, right? Of there actually being a presupposing, a presupposition, as to put this term Lucifer or Satan, or if you want to get into like sort of Ahrimanic type traditions that are sort of subverting the Ahura Mazda, right, and taking away from, with a lot of arbitrary influence, taking away from, you could say, maybe the mental mind operation of passing on memories and having this collective agency was something that we gave up in the infiltration, the inside agent provocateurs of selling ourselves out that we were cost this antiquity by being short-sighted and thinking about our own survival, as opposed to, I hate to say it, but it's like when you look at the book The Prince by Machiavelli, and him talking about race, he was when you get into the Medicis and all the other things he was talking about, he was giving credence over to the fact that race wasn't seen. Like again, you go off on this trail where you're looking at Madison Grant passing of the Great Race, that it wasn't seen that way at all. It was seen as a patriotic effort where the genetics couldn't be linked back to these particular peoples, but there was such reverence placed as to say that whoever patriotically stepped into the place where they understood the culture, the principles that drove a race of peoples, right? That it didn't matter who it was, and so that's a really interesting concept, right? Where you have this passion project, right? But then you get into Manchurian candidates, agent provocateurs, and into high level espionage, where once somebody understands, let them eat cake. Once somebody understands how to infiltrate with total neurolinguistic power and control, right? That people, through the mechanisms, what used to be referred to as synesthesia, that wasn't just like this sort of other sensory, where you could like smell or even taste color, right? Where there was like this blending in of different. It was more about symbols and the manipulation of symbolically patternizing yourself into someone else's memories and being able to, through their imagination, through collective effort, you're actually able to go in and hack and then supplant yourself into this person's memories by mostly attaching to negative influences in their life and showing, yes, you're going to accept that I am like that negative influence in your life, and to even understand collectively how people are produced, right, to experience through their own memory within a confined space, the mouse utopia, certain experiences, experiential outcomes, and to align yourself with that and then be able to turn that into a symbol that now has come to life. What does that symbol smell like? Can you dilate it? Can you make it grow? Can you shrink it? Can you see it as light? Can you give that symbol to me as a token? Can you turn it into a flower? And it's like, wow, you've made me think, right? You've made me go through the operational awareness of thinking. I've given you this symbol. You're my God, and it's like, that's how easy it is to get into the mental mind operation of people. And even more so, how the conditional, through environmental conditions, of how we are brainwashed into becoming a component of a defunct system, right? When you get into the fact that we accept pseudo or quasi skepticism willingly, that really tells you everything.